But there's another one. Here's another interesting story. So there seems to be a split that is happening in the Democratic Party, and that is because of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is now apparently going to some type of war with the Democratic Party, and he's begging them to move away from lobbyists and corporate donors, or else he's basically telling them that they will continue to lose. To move away from big money interest, or they will continue to lose. Now, we're going to talk about power and control, because who controls these parties? It's Wall Street and the military industrial complex. So as long as politicians are bought and paid for, they are not going to move at the will of the people, even though we are the ones that vote for them. So let's get into this. There is a bit of a pull and tug happening within the Democratic Party right now, where some of them are not happy with Bernie Sanders. And then there are some unlikely allies that are deciding to go along with Bernie. Let's get into this, and shout out to Case Study QB for this clip.
Good to be with you. I'm Katie Turn. Democrats are not agreeing right now on a lot. How Kamala Harris lost the election, for instance, why she underperformed everywhere, including the bluest of blue strongholds, why the party keeps losing working class voters, and why they are now losing more of the minority voters. The only thing they do seem to agree on, the party that is the easy part, that there needs to be some change. But how do you affect that change? What exactly do you do? Bernie Sanders argues the next move should be a full-on assault of corporate power and the billionaire class. Senator Chris Murphy largely agrees, arguing that the party needs to rethink support for the neoliberal world order. In other words, the status quo.
Pause. So an unlikely ally to Bernie Sanders, Chris Murphy, of all people, who for the most part is relatively quiet. You don't see him in corporate media quite much, but he has now come out criticizing the Democratic Party for taking corporate money and having this type of donor complex, so to speak. Now, we're going to talk about the BS, because Bernie Sanders and Chris Murphy both know that the Democratic Party is not going to move away from corporate money. So instead of them putting their time in, again, trying to reform the party, their time and energy should be put into a third party and another alternative. Doesn't have to be Green Party, could be any party, but putting their money and their time towards that. They're not going to do that because they still appreciate the system as it is. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that if you know for years that this party has continued to take corporate money and will continue to take corporate money, if you know that this party has lobby interest groups like AIPAC that have basically bought off most of the politicians in Congress, you know damn well that the Democratic Party overnight is not going to do away with corporate money. Neither is the Republican Party, but I don't see Republican politicians trying to do this. Bernie is. And apparently now he got Chris Murphy on this bandwagon too, right? So what this is yet another attempt by Bernie Sanders to try to reform the Democratic Party. Do not see this as anything else other than that. I see people on social media getting excited about this, and they say, yeah, he's fighting. Bernie has pushed back on the Democratic Party multiple times about this particular issue, but in the end, he tells you to support the candidate that is corporate and corrupt, the same corruption that he told you to push back and fight against. Bernie Sanders is not a part of the solution. Bernie Sanders is a part of the problem. Let's continue with this clip here.
Congressman Seth Moulton says it's a woke culture problem, that the Democrats need to stop policing language and thought. Nancy Pelosi doesn't quite agree. She thinks the loss has a lot more to do with the amount of time VP Kamala Harris had to run. Joe Biden dropped out too late. And now Senator John Fetterman is weighing in, but his message is a bit less dramatic. Wait, he says, and stop freaking out.
John Fetterman also had a message that Israel should not be investigated. So that tells you everything about him and who he is.
Joining us now, Washington Post national editor and MSNBC political analyst Phil Rucker, editor-at-large of the 19th and MSNBC political contributor Aaron Haynes, and national affairs correspondent with The Nation, John Nichols. Phil, I'm going to begin with you. Part of the first step to figuring out what to do next is electing a party chair, a DNC party chair, the person in charge of all of the races and the messaging party-wide for the country. It was Jamie Harrison of South Carolina. He's no longer going to be running for it. Who are they looking at, and why does it matter so much, this person in this particular position?
Yeah, well, this is an important position in building the infrastructure, which is pretty foundational for any rebirth of the Democratic Party. This will be the person raising money who will be tending to the health and viability of the state Democratic parties all around the country, who would be helping lay the groundwork for the midterm elections in 2026. But this is not necessarily signing on to some new agenda for the whole Democratic Party. Clearly, there'll be presidential candidates over the next 4 years that would be laying out more of a policy agenda to lead the party forward. But a few people are in the mix for DNC chair. Martin O'Malley, the former governor of Maryland, who's been serving in the Biden administration. He ran for president back in 2016. He has expressed interest in running for DNC chair, and there are a number of others in the mix as well. And there's actually some calls for potentially Rahm Emanuel, who you would remember as Obama's first White House chief of staff, a former congressman who led the Democrats to success in 2006. He's most recently been the ambassador to Japan. There are some in the Democratic Party who hope he would lead the party. The DNC.
Pause. So this is what I'm trying to tell you when I say part of the problem and part of the solution. When you look at who controls the party, that's why you get recommendations like Rahm Emanuel, the guy who closed all those schools in Chicago. He's corporate, he's establishment, he comes from the Obama administration. O'Malley, corporate, establishment. So this is why I'm trying to tell you guys that Bernie Sanders is leading you down a dark alley at night, which you are not supposed to go down alone. He's leading you down a dark alley at night, and you think there's light at the end of that alley, and instead you get jumped by the Democratic Party. People need to understand and wake up and see things for what they really are. Yes, we know corporate money needs to get out of electoral politics. I 100% agree with that. The money is a problem. The money's got to go. But if you tell me that the money has to get out of the party, but the party and the people above you are tapping Rahm Emanuel and Mike O'Malley as potential DNC chair peeps, then that right there lets you know that the party is against what you are saying, and they're not going to move in that way. In fact, Bernie Sanders already knows this. This is his way of trying to get whatever is left of his coalition to go alongside the Democratic Party and to think that there's going to be some type of change. This is a game that Bernie is playing. Ask yourself the question, who is in power? Whoever is in power is who has control. So you know the donors are in power. You know Wall Street and the military industrial complex is in power. And as long as that's the case, you know nothing's going to change. But at the same time, Bernie Sanders also knows that the Democratic Party is not going to move away from corporate money. You probably can't find 10 people in Congress that are willing to do that. 2 of the squad members are already, Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman are going to be gone. The AOC, she all over the place. So it's a game. But there is a split here. Because what you're seeing now is you're seeing that Bernie is leading kind of this type of way. And you see Chris Murphy has jumped on board with him. And Dean Phillips, for whatever reason, said on News Nation that he's willing to go work with Donald Trump. People is all over the place. The Democratic Party is all over the place right now, and people are losing their shit. They don't know what direction to go in. They don't know what direction to go in to actually win, but they're going to go in the direction of what appeases the donors. That's why Nancy Pelosi is running for re-election again. That's how it works.
See that is into the future.
Aaron, what do you make of all these differing assessments about what went wrong and what should be addressed first?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is something to former Speaker Pelosi's point that this was kind of an outlier election in that, Vice President Harris did only have 107 days, which I think probably was the only way that she was going to be the nominee.
Pause. Was 2016 an outlier election too when they lost to Trump in 2016? Was that also an outlier election? Just asking, that's all.
Given our track record in this country for electing a woman president, but was 107 days enough to elect a woman? I don't know if that was the case. Obviously, we saw that it was not the case in this situation. But I mean, this was still a very close race. Democrats came up short this year. But does that mean necessarily that there needs to be a complete overhaul of the system? I'm not sure that is the case. But I mean, I do think that in thinking about the next party chair, thinking about how that person works with state Democratic Party chairs is going to be key. I do think a thing that as we're unpacking kind of quote unquote what went wrong in November, so much of the chatter is centered around the national party and what their support was of those grassroots, of those state groups, and that infrastructure in a way that really would have yielded the turnout result that they needed to win, right? So somebody with the support of folks on the ground and not just folks in Washington could be the person that comes in and makes a difference in the midterms and beyond.
What about you, John? I mean, I know you've...
Let me pause here for a second. So they're still trying to figure out what went wrong, right? Still trying to figure out what went wrong. They don't really want to figure out what went wrong. Rick says leftists can take over the party like MAGA did Republicans. That was just as Democrats. Jamal Bowman recently did an interview with Ronnie Akalik, and he said the Democratic Party can't be reformed. You see where he's at now. That was just as Democrats. That was the mission, was to take over the Democratic Party, and we saw how that went. That's not going to happen. They'll get rid of you before you try to do that. Just like they got rid of Cori Bush, just like they got rid of Jamal Bowman, they'll get rid of you before they even allow that to happen.
Spoken about a bunch to Senator Bernie Sanders about what's going forward. You're also talking to voters on the ground in Wisconsin, a state that Donald Trump won and that Democrats used to be able to very easily rely on.
I'm speaking to you right now from Spring Green, Wisconsin, which is in the southwestern part of the state. It's one of the swingiest parts, not just of Wisconsin, but the United States. And what I can tell you is that when you talk to grassroots Democrats, and I've been in Chicago and Milwaukee and lots of other folks talking to people for a big article I'm writing on this, they're very resilient. They're ready to fight on, but they're very, very frustrated with the party. I think they would agree strongly with Aaron when Aaron said that 107 days is an incredibly difficult time in which to build a campaign, and that Kamala Harris gave it everything she had, but that the party itself wasn't really ready for this and is not an agile, fluid, frankly, functional party in much of the country. And
the party was ready for Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had a year. They were ready for her and she still lost, And so what I'm hearing a lot of is that people want the Democratic Party to be much more in touch with its grassroots, much more populist, much more progressive. I mean, if you talk to grassroots Democrats, that's what you will hear. And then the other thing is that they can't continue to be a 7 or 8 state swing state party, right? That it's got to be a national party. And the reason for that is that if it was a national party, a little bit more energy into building up all of these state parties, there's almost no question they could have won the House of Representatives this year. They didn't win the House, and as a result, they're in a much weaker position than they would have been. So hearing a lot of stuff, but especially a lot of passion for getting resources out to the states, and frankly, getting a much more populist, much more progressive message, similar to what
Chris Murphy and Bernie Sanders are talking about.
Well, getting a populist message. And keep this in mind, like I said before, this is not what the donor class wants. The reason why when Bernie ran, there were so many attacks on him is because the donor class was against it. Remember, that wasn't like a billionaire campaign. Bernie was grassroots. Like a lot of those donations were small dollar donations, like $27 donations, right? So keep that in mind. But at the same time, when they want something shut down, they'll shut it down. They don't want a populist message because the donors don't want a populist message. You know, everyone's got to understand that. The reason why you don't see more of these candidates in the Democratic Party running on a populist message is because that's not what their donors want. They don't want them running on Medicare for all. They don't want them running on canceling student loan debt. They don't want them running on increasing the minimum wage. They want them to run a, moderate style, which I would call actually right wing campaign that is going to appease the donor class, not working class people. So I want you to understand how the media also has a hand in this. This is not new information to MSNBC. Anybody with a brain that's looking around can tell that those populist issues actually do well with the people. And the exit polls showed that after 2016 and after 2020, the exit polls showed that. But the media's job is to also parrot the narrative for the donor class as well. So the media did everything that they could to negatively speak about those populist issues. When we talked about Medicare for all, they said they're going to take your health care away. And people fell for that too. That's their role, to go along with what the donor class wants. When I tell you that they sold their soul, they did. So do you really believe that if the next candidate that runs through the Democratic Party, you believe they run on a populist message? Do you really believe that the DNC is going to allow them to become the nominee? No, we went through this. We went through this with Bernie twice. Because that's not what the donors want. They'll rig it at the convention if they have to, just like they did in 2016. So keep in mind, the media is a big part of this. They are also a part of the power and control because they control the narrative.
I think Dan Osborne is an interesting case here. This is the union leader who ran as an independent in Nebraska, almost beat the Republican incumbent, was doing really well for a while, especially in the polling. And I was told that what ended up losing him the race, this is one assessment from a Democratic source, is that the Democratic Party, not the party itself, but the supportive groups of the Democratic Party came in and started funding Dan Osborne. They started making ads for Dan Osborne. And then suddenly he was more associated with the Democratic Party nationally. And that became a problem for him because he wasn't seen as somebody who was an outsider. Why would the Democratic Party nationally have such a bad profile that it could have potentially lost him the race?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've written a lot about Dan. In fact, I spent a day or so with Dan Osborne traveling around Nebraska, and I can tell you that he had a meticulously calculated campaign. His goal was to make sure that people saw him as truly independent. He's very progressive on a lot of labor issues, on quite a few issues, but a little bit more conservative on some other things, and he just didn't want to be the face of the National Democratic Party. This goes back, way back to when Biden was a candidate, all the way through the campaign. And I think this is one of the deeper things. I've spent an immense amount of time traveling to what are referred to as red states and seeing Democrats come very close, either running as Democrats or sometimes in Osborne's case as an independent, very close to winning, but not quite unlocking that calculus. What people tell me again and again, that part of that calculus is that the national party seems in many cases to be way too tied to Washington. It's not about it's woke or something like that. In fact, you can find plenty of polling data that shows that those aren't really the issues that are moving people, one way or the other. What's really concerning is a sense that Washington itself is broken, that it is, in fact, too tied to corporations, too tied to insiders, and that frankly, the Democrats carried that image, at least in this election. Although remember, in 2 years, the Democrats won't be in charge, the party that's in charge, and they, if they get their act together, might be able to run as a much more populist force.
Which they don't want to happen. But he's right when he says they're tied to corporations, they're tied to Wall Street. I would have said that differently. I would have said that Wall Street owns them, right? So words matter and words have meaning. When you say, oh, they're tied to somebody, that's one thing. But when you say, no, Wall Street owns them, that really, I think, wakes people up a little bit more and shows them the dynamic of that type of relationship. It is not a relationship that is on the same level. It's not. Wall Street owns them. So it's not like a horizontal relationship. We got to be very clear about that. But you'll even see this here in this clip from Case Study QB. They also bring up the donor class. And Michael here is going to try to lie and say that donors don't buy these politicians. Watch this.
So you had Bernie Sanders tweeting on Monday, if the Democratic Party is to become a Democratic Party, the first job of a new DNC chair is to get the super PAC money out of Democratic primaries. AIPAC and other billionaire-funded super PACs cannot be allowed to select Democratic candidates.
Pause. Let's look at this tweet here from Bernie Sanders and let's dissect the hell out of it, because I noticed something about this tweet. If the Democratic Party is to become a Democratic Party, the first job of a new DNC chair is to get super PAC money out of Democrat primaries. Does everybody notice this? Primaries, not out of the party. AIPAC and other billionaire-funded super PACs cannot be allowed to select the Democratic candidates. Pay close attention to the way that this is worded, because in this tweet, he's not calling for the Democratic Party to remove all corporate money. He said that they need to get super PACs out of the Democratic primaries. Well, Wall Street and billionaires and all the stuff, there are other ways that they can donate without donating through a super PAC. I've shown you before on Open Secrets. And then this part right here, AIPAC and other billionaire-funded super PACs cannot be allowed to select Democratic candidates. He's correct about AIPAC selecting candidates, which Michael's going to go on to disagree with that. But I think what's important here is that it's not just super PAC money. That's what people have to understand. So it's all corporate money. It should be funded by grassroots. It should be grassroots funded the same way that Bernie Sanders' campaign was funded, the same way that the squad members' campaigns were. It should be grassroots funded. No corporate money at all. Also, no money from the military-industrial complex. Now listen to what Michael says, because he's crazy. Watch this.
Democratic candidates, they typically don't. They're not going to put their money into a DNC chair. They typically don't. They're not going to put their money into a DNC chairman's race.
Michael is lying his ass off. They typically do. They typically do select the candidates. They typically do. I played the audio recording for you on the show. If you haven't seen it, watch the video with the thumbnail. It's more recent. The thumbnail says sellouts, and it shows Hakeem Jeffries, and it talks about how the Congressional Black Caucus is selling out to AIPAC. Watch the video, and you'll see where I pointed out where you can hear the audio recording of AIPAC discussing how they start recruiting people to be a part of the Congressional Black Caucus when they're in high school, not even college, high school. They do select them. They do pay for them. Michael knows this. Michael is paid to lie to you. Before these people get on the air, they're told what they can say and they're told what they can't say. And if they say what they can't say, they might get the boot. or demoted. So when we talk about the powers that be, again, who owns MSNBC, but more so, who are the shareholders that are part of MSNBC? It's all controlled by money. So he's paid to lie to you. We have to change the way we say things. I think a number of times we say, oh, they don't know any better, or how can they be this stupid, or how do they not get this? What don't they understand? They do understand it. They do get it. They're not stupid. They're paid to pretend like they are. That's the narrative we got to lead with. They are paid to lie to you.
So again, for me, as the former head of a party, as county chairman and a state chairman, that to me is short-sighted thinking about where the landscape is. One thing that has very little to do with the other. Super PACs and all those guys play in elections and campaigns. That's a different conversation than running for chairman and telling the people who are going to write checks, we don't want you writing checks.
Yeah. Do you see how ridiculous Michael sounds? He really wants us to believe that the DNC chair is someone who's corporate and bought and paid for. Jamie Harrison was also owned by AIPAC. So is Rahm Emanuel. Anyone who sits in that seat, they're going to respond to the Israel lobby. We all know this. He really wants us to believe this. And look at the look on her face. She knows he's lying. Honey, we know. She knows he's lying.
You're absolutely right. With all due respect to Senator Sanders, you might want to join the party if you want to have something.
Well, there is that.
Just on his face, that's a little problematic.
Yeah.
Now look at who she is. Former Democratic National Convention Committee CEO. So they bring on someone who's one of their own to push back on the criticism of the DNC. How fitting.
For me. Now, in terms of the money, look, that's not the DNC's issue. You're exactly right, Mr. Chairman, that that kind of money is in local races and state races, and the laws vary by state. Yep. So for the DNC to spend its time and energy on what state A says versus what state B says, versus what C candidate C says, just doesn't make any sense to me. There's so much work for the next chair to do. That would not be in the top 10 of things that I'd focus on.
Of course not, because you're bought and paid for too. See, they don't want to focus on the money. They don't want to focus on the money because if you focus on the money, then you have to focus on the lies and the corruption. And then there's their job. Okay, that's their job. Once they start focusing on that, that is it. They're done. So, yes, corporate money needs to be removed from electoral politics, but we all know that is not going to happen. If it does happen, it's not going to happen anytime soon. So Bernie Sanders is wasting his time. If you believe in this, he's wasting your time and energy. And it sounds like to me it's just some other grift for him to try to get you to continue to stay within that party, maybe tease another run at something. Who knows? Who knows? But it's to keep you where you are. You don't see Bernie Sanders pushing you towards an alternative that will get you out of the spot you're in. You see Bernie Sanders keeping you exactly where you are. We can't fall for that. Can't fall for it, fam. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.